This channel examines the Jeffrey Epstein case using court documents, public records, and verified reporting. We do not speculate. We do not accuse. We document what exists, and what remains unanswered. Everything presented here is drawn from publicly available sources. This is not a theory channel. This is the file. In high-profile cases involving extensive investigations, one of the most frequently asked questions is simple. Why do some names appear in documents while others do not? At first glance, the presence or absence of a name may seem meaningful on its own. However, in legal contexts, this visibility is not arbitrary. It is the result of structured processes that determine what becomes part of the official record. Legal documents are not comprehensive lists of everyone connected to a case. They are purpose-driven records created to support specific legal arguments, document proceedings, or present evidence within defined parameters. As a result, only certain individuals are referenced, and only in certain ways. This creates a key distinction. A name appearing in a document does not automatically indicate legal responsibility or wrongdoing. It may reflect a wide range of roles, such as a witness providing testimony, a subject of discussion within a filing, a participant in a recorded interaction, a reference point in a broader timeline. Each appearance has a specific context, and that context determines its meaning. Equally important is the absence of names. Not all individuals connected to an investigation will appear in publicly available documents. This may be due to legal limitations, evidentiary thresholds, or procedural decisions. In many cases, inclusion depends on relevance. If a person's name does not directly contribute to proving a legal argument or supporting a filing, it may not be included, even if they are part of the broader context. There is also the issue of documentation pathways. Names appear in records when they are captured through evidence such as emails, logs, testimony, or official filings. If no such documentation exists, or if it is not introduced, those names remain outside the visible record. Another factor is legal filtering. Before documents become public, they pass through multiple layers of review. During this process, certain information may be limited, redacted, or excluded entirely. This reinforces a central idea. Legal records are not designed to show everything, they are designed to show what is necessary within a specific legal framework. Understanding this helps clarify why some names are visible while others are not. It is not simply about presence or absence. It is about how the legal system structures and presents information. In legal records, names do not appear simply because individuals are connected to a case. Their inclusion depends on one central factor: evidence. Evidence acts as the gateway. For a name to be included in a document, it must be tied to material that has been recorded, collected, and deemed relevant within the legal process. Without that connection, the name remains outside the official record. This creates a structured pathway. Names typically enter legal documents through specific types of evidence, such as emails and communications, flight logs or travel records, financial documents, witness testimony, official filings and exhibits. Each of these sources captures information in a different way, but they all share a common requirement: they must be documented and verifiable. If a person's name appears in one of these materials, it may become part of the record, provided it meets the necessary legal standards. However, not all documented names are included. Evidence must also pass through selection and admissibility filters. If a document is excluded, challenged, or deemed irrelevant, the names within it may never be presented in court or included in unsealed records. This means that visibility is not just about existence, it is about eligibility. Another important factor is contextual relevance. Even when a name appears in a document, it may not be included in filings unless it directly supports a legal argument. For example, a large dataset may contain many names, but only a subset will be referenced in court. This leads to selective extraction. Legal teams identify which parts of the evidence are necessary for their case. Names that do not contribute to that objective may remain unmentioned, even if they are present in underlying materials. There is also the issue of verification. Before a name is used in a legal context, it must be linked clearly and accurately to the evidence. Ambiguous or unclear references may be excluded to avoid confusion or misinterpretation. This reinforces the need for precision. Courts require that information be reliable and clearly established, especially when it involves identifying individuals. Another limitation is availability of evidence. If no documented record exists linking a person to the material being examined, their name cannot be included, even if there are assumptions or external discussions about their involvement. This highlights a critical principle. Legal records reflect what can be proven through evidence, not what may exist outside of it. As a result, some names appear because they are directly supported by documented material, while others do not because they lack that evidentiary foundation. Understanding the role of evidence clarifies why visibility in legal documents is highly selective. It is not a reflection of all connections, it is a reflection of what has been captured, verified, and introduced within the legal framework. Even when a name exists within documented evidence, it does not automatically appear in legal records. The next layer of filtering is relevance, combined with the defined scope of the case. Legal relevance is precise. A name is included only if it contributes directly to proving or challenging a specific legal claim. If a person's connection does not affect the charges, timeline, or arguments being presented, their name may be excluded, even if it exists within the broader evidence. This creates a narrowing effect. Large volumes of material may contain many references, but only those that meet the standard of legal necessity are selected for inclusion in filings or proceedings. Another important factor is case scope. Every legal case is defined by boundaries, such as a timeframe, location, and set of alleged actions. These boundaries determine what is considered part of the case and what falls outside it. If a name is connected to events beyond that scope, it may not appear. This is not because the connection is ignored, but because it is not part of the specific legal framework being examined. There is also the issue of focused argumentation. Legal teams aim to present clear, structured arguments. Including too many names or unrelated references can complicate the case and reduce clarity. As a result, only those individuals who are essential to the argument are typically mentioned. This leads to intentional limitation. Names are selected not just based on presence in evidence, but based on their role within the narrative being presented in court. Another factor is distinguishing between primary and secondary connections. Some individuals may appear in records indirectly, for example, through association or proximity, but without a direct role in the events being examined. These secondary connections are less likely to be included in legal documents. Courts prioritize direct, relevant links. There is also the matter of judicial oversight. Judges can limit the inclusion of names if they are deemed unnecessary, potentially prejudicial, or outside the defined scope. This ensures that proceedings remain focused and fair. As a result, even documented names may never be publicly referenced within the case. This reinforces a key understanding. Legal records are not comprehensive directories, they are targeted presentations of relevant information. Another important point is procedural consistency. Once the scope of a case is defined, both sides must operate within it. Expanding beyond that scope requires justification and approval, which is not always granted. This further restricts which names appear. Understanding relevance and scope helps clarify why some individuals, despite being part of the broader context, do not show up in official documents. It is not about omission in a general sense. It is about alignment with the specific legal questions being addressed. Even when a person's name is included in legal records, that does not always mean the public will see it. Before documents are released, courts often apply redactions and privacy protections, which can remove or obscure certain identities. This means that a name may exist in the original record, but remain hidden in the public version. Redaction is one of the most common reasons why some names appear while others do not. Courts may choose to remove names for several reasons: to protect personal privacy, to avoid revealing sensitive information, to comply with legal restrictions, to protect individuals who are not central to the case. These protections are especially common when documents contain references to people whose identities are not necessary for public understanding of the case. Another key factor is the distinction between public visibility and legal inclusion. A name may be fully visible to attorneys, investigators, and the court, while remaining redacted in documents released to the public. This creates two versions of the same record: the complete legal document, the public version with limited visibility. As a result, the absence of a name in public records does not necessarily mean the name was absent from the underlying case material. There is also the issue of partial disclosure. In some cases, courts release documents gradually. A name that is initially redacted may later become visible if legal circumstances change. This can happen when a related case concludes. A privacy concern no longer applies. A court decides that the information can now be disclosed. This means visibility can change over time. Another reason names may remain hidden is protection of third parties. Legal records often contain references to people who are connected indirectly or only briefly. Courts may determine that public disclosure of these names is unnecessary or potentially unfair. This reflects an important principle. The purpose of a public legal record is not to reveal every individual mentioned. It is to reveal only those identities that are legally relevant and appropriate to disclose. There is also the factor of legal risk. Releasing names without sufficient context can lead to misunderstanding or reputational harm. For this reason, courts may err on the side of caution when deciding what becomes public. This creates an additional layer of filtering. Even after evidence and relevance determine which names belong in the case, privacy rules and redactions determine which of those names become publicly visible. Understanding this helps explain why the public record may appear incomplete. The missing names are not always absent because they were excluded from the case. Sometimes, they are absent because they are still protected within the legal process. Not all legal documents are the same, and the type of document plays a major role in determining which names appear, and how prominently they are presented. Each document serves a specific function. Because of this, different types of records include names for different reasons, and with different levels of detail. Understanding these differences is essential to understanding visibility. One of the most common sources of names is witness testimony. When individuals provide statements, either in court or during depositions, their names, and sometimes the names of others they reference, may be included. However, even here, inclusion depends on relevance and legal boundaries. Another key category is legal filings. These include motions, responses, and briefs submitted by attorneys. In these documents, names are used selectively to support arguments. Legal teams often reference only those individuals who are directly connected to the point being made. This means that many names present in underlying evidence may never appear in filings. There are also exhibits and supporting documents. These can include emails, logs, or records attached to filings. Exhibits often contain a broader range of names, as they reflect raw or semi-processed information. However, not all exhibits are made public, and some may be partially redacted. Another important category is summaries and reports. These documents condense large amounts of information into structured narratives. In doing so, they often include only the most relevant names, leaving out others that are considered secondary. This creates a layer of abstraction. As information is summarized, visibility is reduced to what is necessary for clarity and focus. There are also internal or procedural documents. Some records are created for administrative or procedural purposes and may contain names that never appear in public-facing materials. These documents may remain sealed or restricted. This highlights a key point. Different document types operate at different levels of detail and visibility. Another factor is editing in preparation for release. Before documents are made public, they may be reviewed and adjusted. This process can further limit which names appear, especially in documents that were not originally intended for public access. As a result, visibility is shaped at multiple stages. The type of document, the purpose of the document, the selection of content within it, the review and release process. Each stage introduces its own filters. This leads to a layered outcome. Some names appear frequently because they are central to multiple documents and arguments. Others may appear only once, or not at all, depending on how the material is structured and presented. Understanding document types clarifies an important idea. Visibility is not uniform across the record. It varies depending on how information is recorded, organized, and presented within different legal documents. Beyond evidence, relevance, and document type, another powerful force shapes which names appear in legal records: legal strategy. Attorneys do not simply present all available information. They select, emphasize, and structure that information to support a clear and persuasive argument. This strategic approach directly affects which names become visible, and how often they are repeated. Every name serves a purpose. In legal filings and courtroom arguments, individuals are referenced when their inclusion strengthens a position. If a name does not contribute meaningfully to that objective, it may be omitted, even if it exists in the broader record. This creates selective emphasis. Some names appear frequently because they are central to key arguments. Others may appear rarely or not at all, because they are not necessary for the case being presented. Another important factor is narrative construction. Both sides aim to present a coherent version of events. Including too many individuals can complicate that narrative and reduce clarity. As a result, legal teams often limit references to those who are directly tied to the core argument. This leads to focused storytelling within legal boundaries. There is also the issue of risk management. Mentioning a name can introduce uncertainty. It may open the door to additional questions, counter-arguments, or unintended interpretations. Attorneys must consider whether including a name strengthens or weakens their position. If the risk outweighs the benefit, the name may be left out. Another strategic element is repetition and reinforcement. Names that are important to a case are often repeated across multiple documents and arguments. This repetition increases their visibility and significance within the record. In contrast, names that are not emphasized may fade into the background, even if they appear in underlying materials. There is also the factor of oppositional strategy. One side may choose to highlight certain individuals, while the other side may avoid or minimize those same references. This creates an uneven pattern of visibility across the record. Understanding this dynamic is important. It shows that the presence of a name is not just a matter of evidence, it is also a result of how that evidence is used. Another consideration is efficiency and clarity. Legal arguments must be presented within time and structural limits. Including unnecessary details or peripheral individuals can distract from the main points. Strategic omission helps maintain focus. This reinforces a central idea. Legal records are not neutral compilations of all available names. They are structured presentations shaped by intentional decisions. As a result, some names appear prominently because they are strategically important, while others do not because they are not essential to the argument being made. Understanding the role of strategy helps explain why visibility is uneven, even among individuals connected to the same case. Another critical factor that determines whether a name appears in legal records is jurisdiction, the legal authority of a court to address specific events, locations, and individuals. Jurisdiction defines the boundaries of a case. A court can only consider matters that fall within its legal authority. This includes where events occurred, which laws apply, and which parties are subject to that system. If an individual's connection to a case lies outside those boundaries, their name may never appear in that particular proceeding. This creates geographic and legal limits. In complex cases involving multiple locations, activities may span different countries or regions. Each of these areas operates under its own legal system, meaning that no single court can address every aspect at once. As a result, visibility becomes fragmented. A name may appear in one jurisdiction's records but not in another's, depending on where the relevant events are being examined. Another factor is legal separation of cases. Even when events are related, they may be handled as separate proceedings in different courts. Each case has its own scope, evidence, and objectives. This means that names included in one case may not be included in another. There is also the issue of authority over individuals. Courts can only act on individuals who fall within their jurisdiction. If a person is not legally subject to that court's authority, their involvement may not be formally addressed within that case. This limits inclusion. Even if a connection exists, it may not be reflected in the record if it cannot be pursued within the legal framework of that jurisdiction. Another important aspect is cross-border complexity. When cases involve international elements, coordination between legal systems becomes necessary. Differences in laws, procedures, and standards can affect what information is shared and how it is used. This can lead to gaps. Certain names may not appear because the relevant information is held in another jurisdiction or cannot be easily integrated into the case at hand. There is also the factor of legal thresholds. Different jurisdictions may have different standards for including names in legal documents. What qualifies as relevant or admissible in one system may not meet the criteria in another. This further shapes visibility. Another key point is procedural limitation. Courts focus on the matters they are tasked with resolving. Expanding beyond those boundaries requires legal justification, which is not always granted. This reinforces a central idea. Legal records reflect the authority and limits of the court that produces them. They are not global records, they are jurisdiction-specific. As a result, some names appear because they fall within the defined legal boundaries of a case, while others do not because they exist outside those boundaries, even if they are part of the broader context. Understanding jurisdiction helps explain why visibility is not only selective, but also distributed across different legal systems and proceedings. Not all names become visible at the same time. In many cases, when a name appears is just as important as whether it appears at all. This is largely influenced by the process of unsealing documents and staged public releases. During active investigations and trials, many records remain sealed. This means that certain names may already exist within legal documents, but are not accessible to the public. Their visibility is delayed, not absent. When documents are unsealed, that visibility can change. Names that were previously hidden may become public, sometimes years after the original events. This creates a time gap between documentation and disclosure. However, unsealing does not always reveal everything. As discussed earlier, documents are often released with redactions. Some names remain hidden even after unsealing, depending on legal, privacy, or procedural considerations. This leads to partial visibility. Some individuals become visible through newly released documents, while others remain obscured despite being part of the same material. Another important factor is phased disclosure. Courts may release documents in stages. A name that is redacted in one release may appear in a later version if restrictions are lifted. This creates an evolving record. Visibility is not fixed. It can change over time as legal conditions shift and additional material becomes available. There is also the role of legal triggers. Documents are often unsealed in response to specific events, such as court rulings, motions filed by legal parties, the conclusion of related proceedings. These triggers determine when information, including names, becomes accessible. Another factor is context at the time of release. A name revealed early in a process may be interpreted differently than one revealed later, when more information is available. Timing influences how that name is understood within the broader narrative. There is also the challenge of fragmented exposure. Names may appear in separate documents released at different times. Without connecting these releases, it can be difficult to see how they relate to one another. This reinforces the importance of timeline awareness. Understanding when documents were unsealed helps clarify why certain names appear at specific moments, and why others may still be absent. Another key point is public attention cycles. Newly unsealed documents often receive immediate focus, while earlier releases may be overlooked. This can create an uneven perception of which names are significant. In reality, visibility is often the result of timing rather than importance. Understanding unsealed documents leads to a critical conclusion. Some names do not appear simply because they have not yet been publicly released, or are still legally protected. Their absence may be temporary, conditional, or permanent, depending on the legal framework. When certain names appear in legal documents while others do not, the difference often shapes how a case is understood by the public. However, this understanding is influenced not only by the information itself, but by the gaps between what is visible and what is not. These gaps create interpretive space. Observers may try to draw conclusions based on the names that are present, sometimes assuming that visibility reflects importance, involvement, or relevance. At the same time, the absence of names can lead to speculation about what is missing. This creates a potential imbalance. Legal records are structured and selective, but public interpretation may treat them as complete representations, even when they are not. Another factor is focus and repetition. Names that appear frequently across documents tend to receive more attention. Repetition can create a sense of prominence, even if that prominence is the result of legal strategy rather than overall significance. In contrast, names that appear rarely, or are partially hidden, may receive little attention, regardless of their context. There is also the issue of context loss. When names are extracted from documents and discussed independently, the surrounding information that explains their role may be missing. This can lead to misunderstandings about why a name appears in the first place. For example, a name may be included as part of a reference, a communication, or a timeline entry, not necessarily as a central figure in the case. Without context, that distinction can be unclear. Another important point is difference between legal meaning and public interpretation. In legal terms, the inclusion of a name reflects its relevance to a specific argument or piece of evidence. In public discussion, however, that inclusion may be interpreted more broadly. This creates two parallel understandings: a legal interpretation based on structured criteria, a public interpretation shaped by visibility and discussion. There is also the influence of information timing. As documents are released over time, new names may emerge. Each release can shift attention and reshape the narrative, sometimes without fully integrating earlier information. This leads to evolving perception. What is understood at one moment may change as more material becomes available. Another factor is selective exposure. Media coverage and public discussion often focus on specific aspects of documents. This can amplify certain names while leaving others relatively unnoticed. This does not change the underlying record, but it does shape how that record is perceived. Understanding these dynamics leads to a key conclusion. The presence or absence of names in legal documents does not provide a complete picture on its own. It is one part of a larger system that includes evidence, context, timing, and interpretation. Recognizing this helps reduce the risk of misinterpretation. It encourages a more careful approach, one that considers not only what is visible, but also why it is visible and what may remain outside the public record. After examining evidence, relevance, document types, redactions, legal strategy, jurisdiction, and timing, a clear conclusion emerges. The appearance of names in legal records is not random. It is the result of a structured and multi-layered process. This process is built on selection and limitation. Legal systems are designed to present information that is necessary to address specific questions. They are not designed to include every individual connected to a broader situation. As a result, visibility is filtered at multiple stages. First, there is evidence. A name must be tied to documented material. Then comes relevance. That material must contribute to a defined legal issue. Next is admissibility and scope. Only information that fits within procedural and jurisdictional boundaries is included. After that, legal strategy shapes presentation. Attorneys decide which names to emphasize, repeat, or omit. Finally, redactions and disclosure rules determine what becomes publicly visible. Each layer reduces the number of names that appear. This creates a refined outcome. A limited set of individuals becomes visible within the official record, while many others remain outside it. This leads to an important distinction. The presence of a name reflects inclusion within a specific legal framework, not a complete measure of involvement or importance. Likewise, the absence of a name does not necessarily indicate a lack of connection. It may reflect lack of admissible evidence, irrelevance to the defined case, jurisdictional limits, strategic decisions, privacy protections or redactions. Understanding this prevents oversimplification. Legal records are often interpreted as if they represent the full scope of a case. In reality, they represent a structured subset of information, shaped by rules and decisions at every stage. Another key insight is the role of time. Names may appear later through unsealed documents or additional releases. Visibility is not always immediate, it can evolve as legal conditions change. This reinforces the idea that the record is dynamic, not fixed. There is also the matter of interpretation. Public understanding is influenced by which names are visible, how often they appear, and how they are discussed. However, this perception is shaped by presentation, not just underlying reality. This creates a gap between what is legally documented and visible, what may exist within the broader context. Recognizing this gap is essential for accurate understanding. In conclusion, the visibility of names in legal documents reflects the structure of evidence and relevance, the boundaries of jurisdiction and procedure, the influence of legal strategy, the impact of privacy and disclosure rules. It is not a complete map of all connections, it is a carefully constructed legal representation. And within that representation, what appears, and what does not, reveals not just information about individuals, but about how the legal system itself organizes, filters, and presents reality. The documents exist. The questions remain. This channel will continue examining what is public, and what is still hidden. If you value documented analysis over speculation, consider subscribing. More files coming.